Thank you guys for coming this morning. Our topic today is education, and it's something that's obviously very important to the chamber. We spend a lot of time on education issues. Mike Edwards is very engaged, serves on the state board, and it's important for our entire community. These three that are here are incredibly engaged in education issues and are on the right committees and chair the right committees. So I'm going to introduce them first, and we'll get into our topics. Representative Harry Brooks. Most of you know Harry. He chairs the House Education Administration and Planning Committee and is a member of the House Education Instruction and Programs Committee and the House Education Administration and Planning. So very engaged, very powerful positions. Representative Dunn, member of the House Education Instructions and Programs Committee and the subcommittee. Roger Kane chairs the House Education Instruction and Programs Committee and a member of both House Education subcommittees. So these guys are the go-to people, and we're very fortunate that we have them representing Knox County in the legislature. So, before we get started, Bill Dunn, you attended the town hall last night. Tell us real quickly what went on. I know all of you read about that. Were there big protests?
Well, no, there was 400, 500 people at it, and I'm still alive, so that's good. It wasn't a very pro-Republican crowd, for sure. But Michelle was there also. It was a very good discussion. My takeaway is, healthcare, it's a mess. I think, I know I'm a genius. A lot of the conversation, first of all, people share, their stories, and that's always going to touch you. But, we're always looking for solutions. And a lot of the conversation dealt with why the people were against repeal and replace. They wanted to repair. The thing was, nobody was talking about how you repair it. And so I think that's kind of the next step that we have to hear from people. If you don't want to repeal it, replace it, you want to repair it, I'd like to hear some ideas. Now, we're not really going to vote on that. We can look at ways on how we interface with the federal government and the healthcare program. But it's always good to go to something like that. You gain new knowledge, you hear what people say, and then you use that with the other knowledge you have to come up with decisions. So yeah, I know some people don't want to face the mobs, but I actually think that's what you're supposed to do.
And Knox County is going to have a real problem next year because there will be no health care provider for the folks. Humana was the last one we had. They weren't the best sometimes as far as all the different hospitals and facilities. They've chosen not to serve Knoxville either. So we will be the largest metropolitan city with no health care provider insurance-wise for people who are on the ACA. Before all the education, I used to serve on the insurance banking committee, and I've been on the healthcare task force that the Speaker of the House came up with to try to address people. When you try to create a healthcare plan that's a one-size-fits-all, it's always going to be a disaster. You've got to be able to factor in things like, to understand that I pay the same premium as a 53-year-old man who is 490 pounds, who's had cancer 4 times. He and I pay the exact same rate. The only thing difference is if he's a smoker, he'll pay more, otherwise he doesn't. That's the only difference in the system. You've got to be able to differentiate a little bit more than that. But in the federal government's idea of simplicity, they came up with, okay, everybody will pay the same rate based on age. Well, lifestyle has to factor in a little bit into this. And that's one of the reasons that you've seen 36% rate increases, and then last year Blue Cross and Blue Shield filed a 62% rate increase. I've done insurance since 1988. And I remember grumbling at 8 and 12% rate increases. I've never seen 36 and 62% rate increases. And this is the problem when you do a one-size-fits-all. Now, I don't know what they've got going on. We're working on the task force. The task force, by the way, wasn't designed to fix the ACA. In the government's thinking, everybody would expand Medicaid. And then surprisingly enough, I think 31 states didn't expand Medicaid. So there's a whole population of people who are stuck in, we call it like a donut. They make too much money to get on TennCare, and they don't make enough money to get any subsidy from the federal government. And there's about 400,000 people in this group that are just stuck. And so that's what the task force was supposed to come out with. Now, supposedly, of course, we don't have any real knowledge because, I mean, I guess check Twitter every 15 minutes. The federal government's supposed to do block grants. And so we've been trying to meet and figure out what do we do when we get the block grant? You know, how do we figure out how this money is going to get divided up, because we still want to focus on that population, but now we've had to add the people who won't be having health care, like in Knox County, into this mix, and we're hoping there's a new carrier that will come in and provide coverage, but nobody's jumped in when Humana jumped out, so it's a little disconcerting.
All right, we're going to talk.
Sorry to be so long on that.
Oh, that's okay. No, I think that's certainly a timely topic and one that I think has everybody concerned about, what, especially those who've had Humana and now they've pulled out. So more to come on that. All right, let's talk about schools. Governor Haslam has proposed spending an additional $200 million for K through 12, and I think about half of that goes for teacher salaries. Harry, is that going to pass? Can we finally see some increase in teacher salaries?
You know, where that funds are being placed is in the salary component. And what that does is that moves the money back to the LEA, and the LEA can put it into all-in salaries. They can add new positions. There's a multitude of options that are there. We had a rider on the bill last year that if your salaries in your LEA fell below a particular average or a number, then it all had to go to salary improvement. But ultimately in Knox County, it's a call for our LEA, and our LEA has done a great job of raising salaries. But there are times that you have to plug in maybe 3 or 4 more counselors or whatever may pop up in your demands and your list. So it's the idea that the LEAs have a better handle in Knox County how to use that money. And the same with Hamilton County. They've got a better handle. In Hamlin County, they're all maybe different. So therefore, let the LEA make those calls with those dollars. But yes, I think it will pass. There's a lot of money in a lot of other categories too.
Bill?
An LEA is the local education agency. So that's the brief. Somebody was asking what an LEA is. So
that's your local folks, right? Anything else? Local school board.
Right. And first,
Dr. Terry.
First, let me thank Alan and AT&T for hosting this. I'm actually a subscriber to AT&T. I know Alan would like for me to tell you all to buy his services, but we saw what happened to Kellyanne Conway, and so I will avoid that mistake. But, you know, we're talking about teacher salaries. Education always comes back to the children and the students. That's why we exist. There's some places in Tennessee, when you talk to their representatives, where they think schools are jobs programs. It's a place where adults, friends, supporters can get jobs. And I'm very happy and excited to give pay raises because the teachers have really stepped up. We've gone through a lot of reforms. There's been a lot of pain and misery and adjustments, but they've come through, and Tennessee is the fastest improving state 3 years in a row when it comes to education. And so I think you reward people for that. You don't just give raises just to give raises. And so it's very easy, I think, for us to write the check and send it to our teachers because they have delivered.
And we're even looking at teacher colleges. We want to make sure that where these teachers come from are producing a product that creates them to be successful. We've got a couple of colleges right now. One already gave up their ability to, we have 42 different teacher colleges in Tennessee. I don't know if you realize that. And I'm not saying we need to have a monolith where everybody teaches the exact same way. But we have 42 different ways to teach teachers. And so what we've started doing is looking at the colleges and seeing what is the success rate of the teacher post-graduation. We're also looking at, we've got a real problem with reading. And then what you find out is most teacher colleges only subject teachers to 2 classes out of their entire 4 years of sorry, it's still early. Their entire educational process, how about that? Two reading classes. Well, then we're surprised that we don't know how to teach reading as well as we should. So we're actually coming up with programs to help engage teachers and give them additional training, because right now reading is a huge problem in Tennessee. You know, if you want workforce development, children have to be able to read. They can't do your job if they can't read what's on the computer screen or the training manual. So, I mean, we've had one college give up their charter. We've got a couple other colleges that are on the bubble. We've given them grades, you know, basically from, was it 1 to 5, Harry? 1 to 4?
Yeah, in regard to evaluations.
Yeah, we're evaluating the teacher colleges too. Yeah, so you may see a couple teacher colleges decide they're not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to say they don't know what they're doing. They don't produce a product that works in today's real world. And so we're trying to cover it on all fronts here to make sure that teachers are successful, the students are successful, and we're starting at the genesis of where they get their training too.
The commissioner, go ahead, you have something else?
Well, we're on reading, and I know you've got questions, but you want to just have this free thought, how we go. I'm going to share a story, and Buzz, you're going to be involved in this one. You probably know where I'm going. Reading. And it is true. I think Republicans, Democrats, urban rural, we can all agree that we want children to be able to read by 3rd grade. And so I talked to Buzz about the idea, you know, right now the state sends money and say you have to spend it this way. And I talked to him about the idea of kind of block grants. We send you the money, and then you decide, do you want smaller kindergarten classes? Do you want an aide in kindergarten class? Do you want hire reading coaches? And let it be a local. Now, I told him all that. I didn't tell him where the money would come from, though. Those of you who know, I've questioned the Tennessee pre-K program. Why? Because the Vanderbilt study shows that we spend $87 million, and the children who go through the Tennessee pre-K program do worse. Not that they fade back to where the other kids were, but they actually do worse. So my idea was, it's going to be very hard to, once government creates something, you can't get rid of it. But if you could take that money and let the locals decide. Now, what Buzz did when I was talking about reading, he was very nice. He said he's got 2 principals that are knocking it out of the park. They're at challenging schools. Correct me if I say something wrong, but he said you really need to talk to them, and he was very kind to set up a meeting. So I'm talking to these principals who are knocking it out when it comes to reading scores. Well, about halfway into it, I said, well, I guess y'all have pre-K. No, we don't have pre-K. So isn't it interesting? That would go right along with the Vanderbilt study that these children who didn't have pre-K are actually doing so much better. I know some of y'all want to throw knives at me now, but I speak the truth. And so I've worked with the Department of Education, and they're taking the Vanderbilt study seriously, and you're going to see some big changes on how they do pre-K, and they're partnering with me. It's not their bill, but we're going to have some pilot programs where some of this money will be available where locals can decide, would we be better off if we had reading coaches or smaller kindergarten sizes or assistants in kindergarten or a different kind of curriculum. So hopefully that will pass and we'll see what happens.
All right, there was an article in the morning paper about the Commissioner of Education said she's looking at limiting some testing times and mentioned that there was a bill that would also limit testing in all grades. What do you guys know about that, and is that a good idea? Do we need to look at how many tests we're taking and how long time spent in the classroom on testing?
I'll start with comments. One, that yes, the department has proposed a reduction in test and the time of the test. That's coming from the standpoint of the department. There are some folks that don't want our children to do any kind of test. There are some that worry about the juniors are going to die of fatigue in junior high school. I don't know. I grew up in a system, so did Buzz, that we had 6 end-of-course exams every year in high school that lasted 2 to 3, in some instances, 3 hours if you were given extra time, and they were tough. Yeah, I'm not interested in, that's back in the 60s. And I'm just saying that there's a concern that maybe we are testing, but we've responded to that. The department has said, yes, we're going to look at the length of the test, we're going to look at the number of tests, but we have to know what's going on. We have to know if our standards are being taught. We need to know if the aspect of that particular end of course in American history, are we learning the standards? You know, from that standpoint, there are some folks that want to trade out the end of course with the ACT. Those are totally 2 different testing concepts for totally different reasons. You know, the one is not subject to the application to a teacher evaluation, where the end of course you can look at the growth issue. But I support the continuation of where we're heading. The public needs to know. That's why we started all this. Huge outroar among business leaders, among parents. You know, are my children learning something? Well, you've got to have the data, you've got to have the test to understand that answer. So that's where we're at.
Okay.
Bill? Yeah, go ahead.
What about students who are really good when they have like their classwork, their coursework, but they test horribly? How does that factor into the data? Because I was really good at math and science, except when you put it on a test. And it was a completely, because my test scores would have showed that I was deficient in math and science, but I could get it really easy, but couldn't test it to save my life.
No, I think there are circumstances with every child. If you have some reading disabilities, then you struggle with testing because of just reading the question. But you may have that knowledge base. But the point is, we've got to have the data. I understand those difficulties, but the point is that's part of life from the day you're born to the day you die. If you want to see CPA, you're going to take an exam. If you want to be a doctor, you're going to take an exam. If you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to take an exam. If you're going to be an engineer, you're going to take an exam. The list goes on and on and on. We can't just say to a child, we're not going to expose you to these opportunities to deal with this issue, because that for sure will change that, will continue that problem all the way through an adult. But the more you're involved in that particular situation, I think the research also shows that you're going to improve and be better when you become that adult that's got to take that high-stakes CPA exam. So we can't say, hey, we're not going to give you the opportunity, because we're hurting the child.
Bill?
I have to disagree on one thing. You say all these professions, you have to take a test. Politicians don't have to take a test. You just have to be 21 and get 25 signatures. So maybe we need to... Oh, I'm sorry, I'm corrected. He reminded me that's not a profession. So very good. But it's what we do with the data. I think sometimes teachers get upset because they see this is going to be punitive, but the really good schools, the good superintendents, take the information and then try to use it to be useful with. And also, you will have different students who test differently, but if a classroom's got 20 to 30 students, there's a pretty good average of telling how did the teacher do in imparting knowledge. Speaking of politics, you only have to poll 600 people out of Tennessee, out of 6 million people, to get an idea of where people stand. And so in education, we're very fortunate that you have 100. You're kind of polling every single student. So the numbers that come back are very valid when you look at it from a statistical standpoint. And also what happens is when they take a test, and your teacher would have said, she's so bright, she asks good questions, she knows it, I don't know why the test she doesn't do well, that identifies something for that teacher to say, you know what, I may need to work with her on test taking, because it'll make a difference when she takes the ACT or whatever. If they didn't do that, if they didn't discover that you would be in trouble when you took the ACT.
Well, and there's going to be stressors in children's lives, like Harry's saying. The business owner is going to ask them for a project to be completed, and it's stressful, and it's just like taking a big test. But children have to be able to be adapted to this. And like Bill's saying, the test can help us diagnose learning difficulties and learning disabilities that we can address early on. You know, we don't want children to get to the end of high school and feel that they're totally successful in life because we've never tested them, and then they hit the real world and it's a total disaster. I mean, even with testing we have that, you know, but at least it's a good indicator. And it also, you know, I'm working on a bill next week because for some crazy reason I decided to go get a master's at UT at the same time we're in session, so I can't function sometimes at the same time. But reading, I'm coming back to reading. Everybody said in this room, 3rd grade, we've got to have them on task and reading. We only have 43% of our children reading on grade level. This is a huge problem. And the reason maybe that you don't function well in 8th grade math is you can't even read the question to know how to answer the math question. So I'm reaching out to everybody because I've made this, I'm going to be writing a bill this week. And it sounds a little punitive, but it's not. Children have to read by the 3rd grade or they're not going to advance past the 3rd grade for 1 year. Maybe it's physiological. We've got reading coaches, we've got training, we've got all sorts of RTI Square, we got all these programs out there to help children, and it's not working as well as it should. And so we might have an extra year where you just spend time loving to learn to read, whatever that means in your school. Because I think some of the social issues that we deal with, like boys, okay, boys who don't succeed educationally have 2 choices: class clown, class instigator. Those are the 2 choices that many boys have. And girls, same way, but not to the frequency. But it all comes back to reading. They don't feel successful. And when you don't feel successful at what you do, you get frustrated and agitated. Well, amazingly enough, children do too. And it's going to be very difficult to figure out. Hold on, I knew I'd get some sparks off this one. I did, because we passed a law 7 years ago that said we will not socially promote children, and guess what we do? We socially promote them, and we have a law that says you can't do it. You know, we're failing. To me, it's called educational malpractice. You are sending 57% of our children onto a life of poverty and misery because they can't read the material to feel successful in school. And we've got some great programs. Buzz, I do want to talk about your principal. That's why I'm reaching out to people.
I want to get Buzz's reaction to that bill.
But I understand. I figured I'd drop a bomb in the middle of the room and see if anybody noticed. But yeah, it is something that we've done. And maybe somebody else has a better solution, but how is it that we've got all these programs, we spend all this money, we have more reading coaches than have ever existed in the history of the world, and yet we're failing 57% of our 3rd graders. And these aren't my numbers, these are the Department of Ed's numbers from Nashville.
Dwayne, you have...
Why don't we correct the problem before they get to the 3rd grade?
Well, that's part of the testing. We can do testing in 1st and 2nd grade to see if a child's on, you know, so we shouldn't let them get to the 3rd grade. Here's the other thing. I truly believe that teachers know best when a child is not on grade level, and we should be able to have a system to route them in, and we do to a point, but there's some things that should be a little bit more mandatory. One of the things I was talking earlier about is we keep doing things the same way and expect different results. You know, I asked somebody, why do we do school from August to May and then take a week out for flu and a week out for snow? You know, our school board could set up school from March to December if they wanted to, but we keep doing it the same way because we've always done it the same way. You know, we keep doing the school day the same length of time. Our school board has the ability to change the length of time of a school day, maybe 8 to 4, if they need to have more time for children to get things done, and yet we don't. We just keep doing it the same way because, well, we've done it this way for 80 years. We got to start thinking a little bit differently because I think we're compromising our children's success if we don't.
We got questions.
So my question, this isn't a political question. So we have a lot of students that are ESL students in Knox County, more so maybe than some of the surrounding counties. How does that play into the testing scores?
Tell everybody what ESL is.
I'm sorry, English is a second language.
Okay.
So we obviously have a lot of kids in the 4th, 5th grade ESL that are obviously not reading at that level because they are ESL. How does that factor into this?
It does factor in, and you wind up many times with a child that's not reading on level. And I think that we've got some more money coming to the LEAs to deal with that issue. So we're trying to find more dollars to spend with that ESL or ELL kind of situation. So that's there.
Oh, good grief. All right, go ahead. You have
It was a big bomb, sorry.
So I thought that there was already something like that on the books, where you, if you did not, that was before.
There is a law, right.
You didn't pass third grade TCAP, you didn't do the head.
Yeah, there is a statute. I ran that particular bill years ago. Roger and I have talked about this. The way it was languaged is that we ran it just exactly like you don't move. And the fiscal note was somewhere into 200 million or something like that. But then there was an amendment attached to it that said, unless there is a remediation plan.
Right.
And that the RT squared is part of that plan now. So
Okay.
that's there.
Let me ask you a couple questions then, really quick. I'm a literacy coach.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm middle magnet. And I've been a teacher for 10 years, and I've been a coach for 2. And I was in the middle. My most experience is in high school. With this upcoming writing, you had asked some input. So I guess I will ask, I am concerned with ELL. We do have PBLLs a lot in Lonsdale and multiple students. And I don't know if that has, maybe you'll.
The Department of Ed factors out those. In fact, like the new report card that's going to come out where we grade schools, they actually factor out that population and they give it a different modifier when they're looking at giving the school a grade from A to X. So they factor that in, and it's still the same number, and it hasn't changed.
Right. So I'm asking about provisions. Are you keeping those? So if student is in RTI, currently has been in RTI, do they get to still move ahead? And also, I'm worried about the research surrounding retention.
I understand.
Based on the idea of retention is fine between K and 1. After that, it really lowers self-efficacy of students and makes them feel as if they cannot and do not want. So internal motivation is super key.
Sure.
And if students are already feel, and then I'm going to ask you this too, is it based on that one data point, the test only? Is that the determining factor? So you're going to negate 180 days of education and grades to retain a student from one test? Is that
It will be a decision by the principal and the teacher and the test. The principal and the teacher have the 180-day window to look at. So that will be included in this. But here's the deal. I understand the graduation rate of children who have been held back. I completely understand. How much of that is based on the fact that they don't feel successful because they can't read? Maybe that causes more reason to drop out of school than the fact that I held you back in the 3rd grade.
Bill Dunn, you have a comment?
Well, you all are asking us questions. I want to ask you a question. You're on the front lines. You
Yes,
tell
sir.
us. If we sent some money back kind of as a block grant that said the goal is by 3rd grade to improve reading comprehension.
What would we do?
You've heard some of the stuff. Would you decrease kindergarten size?
Yes.
Would you put an assistant in?
Yes.
Would you? and government is we have limited resources and unlimited
Yes,
wants.
sir.
So
Yes,
of
sir.
all the things, if you, what would, if you put an assistant in every kindergarten, would that be better than reducing
The
the
size.
size and having one teacher there?
I think, I can tell you, at least at the building I'm in, I have some of the most dedicated teachers that
Absolutely.
I've ever encountered
Yeah.
in my entire existence in education in 2 different states. But I will say that support is key. Having aides in a classroom is far beneficial than even a 1 to 5 ratio gets difficult, especially at a priority school because you have an attendance issue. So then if I only have 5 kids in my kindergarten, but then 2 of them are out. Now I've got 3 kids in my kindergarten, I'm afraid to move ahead a little too fast because I got to catch people up, right? So if I have 15, but I have an aide, now I can do my center work. I can get those kids in those groups, I can have another person who can assist me in the ways that I find necessary to facilitate that learning so that I can build that confidence and that love of reading.
So right now, your kindergarten teachers, they do not have an aide?
I'm in a middle school.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm in a middle school.
Yeah, so let me respond to a couple of questions that Susan asked me. First of all, let me commend my very brave teacher over here. Absolutely. Speaking up from somebody who's in the trenches working on this. We are so very fortunate to have these guys representing us in the state legislature. They have done terrific work over the years. We don't always agree on particulars. My wife and I don't always agree, but they have just been fantastic advocates for our schools and our students. I want to say, first of all, because Representative Kane's comment about people just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, I want you to know in Knoxville that is not true. So he's speaking from the perspective of state legislator. If you read your News Sentinel today, the lead editorial was about our decision to quit doing elementary summer school this year because it wasn't working. We're not afraid to quit doing things and redesign them so they do work. So I want you to know that there are some school districts that don't keep doing the same thing over and over when it doesn't work. We sit down and figure out what does work. Let me also say this. One of the things, Representative Kane, that you said earlier is that one size doesn't fit all. And I couldn't agree more. And my worry about your bill that you described, that you're talking about trying to get the legislature to enact, which says every single kid is going to be treated the same. If you're not reading on grade level in 3rd grade, you're stuck in 3rd grade. So I would just say that there are some kids who are not capable of reading on grade level. We have several thousand of those children in our schools. And in our schools, and they're not all special ed kids, okay? We catch up a lot of kids between 3rd and 7th grade. You'd be surprised. You read the news, the naysayers, and they say, if you're not reading on grade level in 3rd grade, you're not going to graduate from high school. Baloney. We have about half our kids reading on grade level in the 3rd grade, and by the time they get in 9th grade, we've got about 70% of our kids reading on grade level. And we keep moving up. So I would just say I would be very careful about a kind of one-size-fits-all approach. I like these guys. I like the fact that they're wanting us to keep improving education in Tennessee, but I just want to make sure we don't just do it like, I just be careful about doing one-size-fits-all.
And I agree. That's why I started this with, I'm looking for input.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers, and I'll never pretend I do. But at the same time, it benefits if more people chime in. We get it's like sausage. Everybody chips in a little bit, and it comes out tasting much better.
Go ahead.
I actually have one is a very quick yes/no answer. With these statistics, are the homeschooled kids, the homeschool co-ops, taken into consideration with these statistics too, or is it
No.
just okay? My other question is, and I don't know how many other millennials were in the room. I've been out of school. It would be 6 years in May, and my parents read with me because my mom likes to tell the story. I was walking around when I was like 3 or 4, trying to get somebody to read me a book, and when somebody said, well, why don't you read it yourself? I said, I don't know how. She went out and bought stuff to teach me how to read. But I'm actually trying to start, not a one-size-fits-all, but I've started a business club feature and everything, which I'm hoping to help with high school students. How do you take into consideration high school students that are creatives and athletes who might who understand that the importance of having the core classes, but that's not their focus? How do you take that into consideration?
That has always been a problem. There are children at every high school who are there for various and sundry reasons. Sometimes it's for shop. Sometimes it's for athletics. And that's why the high schools are as multifaceted as they are. But the primary reason that children go to school is not for athletics, it's not for shop, it's to get an education so they can be good citizens in our state.
Well, hopefully.
Hopefully.
All right, we got about 10 minutes. We are
And
behind.
it's my fault. It is truly my fault. I'm sorry.
Chairman Brooks and I have conferred, and we will not let Chairman Kane do anything crazy.
Mike Edwards has a comment, and then Terry.
I got to be at the same meeting that Buzz just left for, and he got wind, I should say this, so he changed all that. So, this is an incredibly substantial, important conversation. And what it is about is that we don't know how to do it.
Come to school.
No, ma'am, we have done a lot of things, and what you're saying may work, what Buzz is saying may work, probably could. I'm not arguing with it. But there's been a whole lot of stuff that has been done. So this is the Chamber of Commerce view of where we are. This is 2,000 job descriptions. Out of it, 80% have shortages. That employers can find people to take those jobs. And the reason is they can't they're not prepared coming out of high school to go into a certificate program or to go into pre-med and be a neurosurgeon or anything in between. We have that much shortage. 43% are not on grade level. That is an interesting number. 2/3 of Americans and 2/3 of Tennesseans cannot read at the level required to be trained for the 80% of the jobs that there are shortages in. So however it's done, understand we're arguing about how to do it. But my question really is the same as Representative Kane. However we end up doing it, it's got to get done. The state has a constitutional requirement to provide public education. The state requires everybody in this room and everybody in the state to pay taxes to fund public education. We just do not require kids to be educated. And that means that, one, the economy doesn't work, and two, kids aren't growing up to get jobs that can provide a living wage. So it's got to stop. And I bet that whatever ends up happening, if we achieve that, because we're going to do one of two things. We're going to drop like a stone, or we're going to succeed. And I bet that whatever we end up doing that succeeds is going to require blood on the floor. We're not going to be able to run marginally or whatever the way we've done the system for 100 years. It just doesn't work. See, I get to say that.
Well, if I could just reiterate, so much of government, it comes down, do you have the money? And we only have so much, so if we're going to give a lot of money to teacher raises, then we may not have money for an assistant in the classroom. And so the bill that I have, I've identified a money source, which is what you have to do. And I've worked with the Department of Education, and we're saying, let's figure out what works. And so we're going to have these pilot programs, and if Vine, you may want to talk to the elementary school and say, if this bill passes, there may be a way to get some money and to say, we may be able to hire some assistants. And then if you say, hey, that's what works, then we can spread that out. And hopefully across the state, different LEAs will come up with different ideas. And from that, and part of the bill, the Department of Education says we're not just giving money for feel-good stuff. We are going to actually study. We're going to have goals. And the successful people who get the money, it'll be rigorous. So we find out, did it really work or was it just feel-good? So I really think that bill can help us with what Mike and others have said. How do we find out what really works?
Well, I'm going to throw another bomb that while you have the microphone, vouchers, because this is something you've worked on. Yeah, I thought you were going to get out of it. Actually, Bill Dunn is...
Have I ever run from that issue?
No,
absolutely
not one time. No, Bill Dunn has been the largest advocate, I would say, of vouchers in Tennessee in the General Assembly. For how many years has this been going on?
Well, let me say this. When I first ran in '94, if you look on my campaign stuff, I talked about parental choice. And so it just has always been natural to me that, and maybe it's because my children are so important to me, and this is such an important decision, I want to have something to do with it. We're talking about 50% of the kids can't read. Well, there's some schools here in Knox County where 90-something% are not proficient. And all I'm saying is give them a different environment, give them a chance. If they don't take it, okay, they don't. But I think I have a moral responsibility to give them one other option besides you're in this zip code, you have to go there. My bill is actually Bill Haslam's. You may not think much of Bill Dunn, but I hope everybody recognizes that Bill Haslam is a wonderful governor, a wonderful person. And it was actually the Department of Education that came up with the idea that as we try to turn around a school where 90% of the children can't read, we've got to have options. They don't have time for us to turn it around. So that's what I have. Chairman,
is it going to pass this year?
We don't know. There's like 3 or 4 different bills, and so it's kind of hard to count heads because there's different. So we had a meeting this. You want me to? Go ahead. Okay. Well, we had a meeting. Harry Brooks has filed a bill that deals with if the LEA, the district, has more than 30 failing schools, then that's where the voucher program would start out to see how it is. Now, Knox County does not have...
Shelby County.
No, it just says any play that has 30 failing schools. It does not name the county. And so I think what we've decided this week, we had a meeting, is that his bill will be the vehicle that goes. And as he looks for votes, if people want to expand it, then it might be amended more my way or Bill Haslam's way, and if they want to restrict it more than it. And so we got to get it down to one vehicle. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman?
I think the thought is this. I've had the opportunity to visit schools all across the state. It's sad. There's some schools that folks, they've been failing for decades. Decades. We have failed. Government. We got to do something. So what I'm suggesting is that if you have an environment where those kids don't have the opportunities to go to, get in a vehicle and travel, half an hour or 45 minutes, we ought to say, here's an option. And the thought being is that there's this. I want to create a pilot, and I want to create a pilot to the point that we can test it. We can answer or do the best we can toward answering the question, will this program work? Has this improved the lot of these children that are stuck in a community that had failing schools for years? Does this option improve their educational outcome? And does it make them more successful as adults down the road? So the idea behind this program is a pilot in areas that have substantial numbers of failing schools. And the thought being is to answer the question, does this program work? We would look at it for a 4 or 5 year period and make the determination. We're going to plug in ideas about, how to evaluate it and make sure that we're evaluating apples to apples, and to see if this opportunity, one, is taken advantage of, and two, is it having a positive impact on the kids. And then come back.
Education came to speak to us this week. And what her message is basically is the timelines are going to get very short for these things. To give a 5 or a 10-year window to see if a program works, you have failed a child his entire high school career, which leads him onto a life of failure post-education. We don't have 10 and 15 years to test things and get them to figure it out. Because it's that educational malpractice thing. We've got to get them going, and we got to engage the parents. The teachers are busting it as hard as they can, but they need help. I tell somebody said, well, what's my child supposed to read if I don't have? Read them the cereal box. Read them the junk mail that comes to every single house. Read them something and teach them how to read the junk mail. We can't we have books from birth to 5 years old. Every child in Tennessee gets a free book. Read them that. So there's no excuses why we don't. It's just that we don't. If mom and dad don't know how to read, we have community schools. We will teach mom and dad how to read. That's what I'm saying. It may not be programs. We got a program for everything. And yet we still have this problem. I'm not saying get rid of the programs, but sometimes we need something else.
There's a bill that I think one of our locals has introduced that would make school board races partisan. Yes or no? Can it pass?
Let me start. If we have a nonpartisan school board, then we need to have nonpartisan school board members. Okay? That means that if there's another election over here, then don't show up as a committee chair to raise money. If we're going to maintain nonpartisan school boards, then we need to maintain nonpartisan political activity. So if we're going to have it nonpartisan, we got to have it nonpartisan. And the reality of it is that some school board folks are involved in partisan elections in a big time, in a big way. So if you want us to be, if you don't want to have a partisan election, then keep yourself out of partisan elections. I mean, the point is this: you can't have it both ways.
Is that a yes?
Yeah, so I'm just saying if the bill passes, it's going to send a message. If it doesn't pass, then it may come back. Because if you want to maintain a nonpartisan election, then you keep out of other races.
Bill Dunn? Yes? No?
Frustration. Is the person with Senator Corker's office still here? She just followed my kid. I like it when Senator Corker talks about Washington, D.C. They spend so much time on minor issues. And maybe it's because I'm old and getting cranky. I am getting old and cranky. But there's so many of these issues that it's going to suck so much energy and talk and thought, well, is this good or bad? In the end, whether they are or not, it's not that important. So I don't know how I'm going to vote. But I get frustrated because we deal with a whole lot of these issues when focusing on getting kids to read and evaluating instruction. And that's going to be my comment on it. I'll look at the bill, I'll hear both sides and see how it is, but we've got a whole lot of bills that suck the energy and time and create political firestorms when really, whether they pass or not, it's not going to make that big a difference. It's not going to make any difference in a kid's life.
I was asked to carry the bill 2 years ago, and my response was, why don't you find some decent candidates who go door to door? All somebody remembers is some nice lady or some nice man knocked on my door saying they're running for school board, and they don't know whether they're Republican or Democrat because they're nonpartisan. And I don't see the value in it. I think it's a distraction, like Bill is saying, where it just kind of sucks the energy out of the legislature and gets us chasing bunny rabbits that we don't need to. But at the same time, if you're going to be nonpartisan, like Harry said, you need to respect the fact that you need to stay neutral. That you're Switzerland, when you're on the school board, and you just don't get involved in other things, because there were some school board members who did get involved in several races around this area, not just in Knoxville, but in other locations, that probably should have just stayed out of it. That would have been the wiser choice.
All right, our time is up. This was a great discussion, and I really appreciate all of the audience involvement. And thank you three, as always. Again, we're very blessed to have three folks from Knox County that are in these positions and really are engaged, as you can